There are some nights that never truly end. They may disappear from the calendar, buried beneath years of ordinary mornings and silent afternoons. But they do not leave the people who survived them. They remain somewhere behind the eyes, waiting. A smell, a sound, a patch of moonlight on water. Anything can bring them back. This story takes place in the summer of 2004, in a small riverside town in southern Ohio called Willow Creek. Back then, the town was barely a dot on the map. A few roads, a handful of farms, an old church, a gas station, and a narrow river that curved around the edge of the woods like a dark ribbon. Most people knew each other by name, and the kind of trouble teenagers got into was usually harmless. At least that was what everyone thought. Ethan Miller was 19 that summer. He was not a bad kid, but he was restless. His days were spent fishing by the creek, riding around on his old bike, skipping chores, and hanging out with his closest friends, Caleb, Noah, and Ryan. The four of them were known around town for doing stupid things. Nothing too serious. Stealing apples from orchards, sneaking into abandoned barns, taking shortcuts through places their parents had told them to avoid. But there was one place even they had never entered after dark. On the far side of the river stood an old abandoned cemetery known as Bell's Rest. It had been there since the 1800s. Most of the headstones were cracked, leaning sideways or swallowed by weeds. Behind the cemetery sat the burned remains of a small chapel that had caught fire decades earlier. People in Willow Creek had stories about that place. Some said they had seen lights moving between the trees when nobody was there. Some claimed they had heard children crying from inside the ruined chapel. Others said that if you crossed Bell's Rest at midnight, you might not come back the same way you went in. Ethan and his friends laughed at those stories. At that age, fear felt like something made for other people. One afternoon, Caleb came up with an idea. There was an old pear orchard on the other side of Bell's Rest, owned by a cranky farmer named Mr. Holcomb. His pears were famous in town, and so was his temper. He had caught boys stealing fruit before and chased them off with a shotgun loaded with rock salt. Naturally, that made the orchard even more tempting. "We go at night," Caleb said, grinning. "Cross the river, cut through the old cemetery, grab a few bags, and get out before anyone knows." Noah agreed immediately. Ryan hesitated at first, but after some teasing, he said he would come too. They decided to meet the next night at 11 under the huge maple tree at the edge of town. When the time came, Ethan showed up with an empty backpack, a flashlight, and the kind of excitement that only comes from doing something you know you should not do. Caleb and Noah were already there. Ryan was not. "Where's Ryan?" Ethan asked. Caleb shrugged. "Sick, I guess." "Sick? Yay." His mom said he's been in bed since dinner, fever or something. That did not make sense to Ethan. He had seen Ryan earlier that same day near the baseball field. Ryan had been perfectly fine, laughing, running around, even reminding Ethan not to chicken out that night. But Ethan did not think too much about it. There were still 3 of them. That was enough. So they headed toward the river. A small rowboat was tied near the bank. It belonged to Ethan's family, and he had used it plenty of times before. The boys climbed in, pushed away from shore, and began rowing across the dark water. The moon was full that night. Its reflection stretched across the river in broken silver pieces. The air was cool, almost too cool for July. Crickets screamed from the grass. Somewhere far away, a dog barked once and then went quiet. At first, Ethan tried to joke around, but Caleb and Noah barely said anything that bothered him. Normally, the two of them never shut up, but now they sat quietly, faces half hidden in moonlight, staring toward the opposite shore. "You guys good?" Ethan asked. Caleb turned his head slowly. "Yeah," he said, "we're almost there." Something about his voice sounded wrong, flat, empty. Ethan blamed it on nerves. They reached the other side, tied the boat to a low branch, and started walking. The path to the orchard wound through the woods and past Bell's Rest Cemetery. Ethan had heard about it his whole life, but he had never stood that close to it before. The iron gate was bent and rusted. A few headstones leaned beneath the trees. The remains of the chapel rose in the background, black against the moonlit sky. For the first time that night, Ethan felt a thin thread of fear pull tight inside his chest. Then Caleb spoke. "The orchard's not far. Just keep moving." Hearing his friend's voice made Ethan feel a little better. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and followed them past the cemetery. A few minutes later, they reached the orchard. The trees were heavy with pears, their branches hanging over the fence. The boys climbed over and got to work. For a while, everything felt normal again. They whispered, laughed quietly, and filled their bags as fast as they could. Then the lights appeared. Flashlights. Not one, not two. Several beams cut through the trees from different directions. A man shouted, "Who's in there?" Another voice yelled, "You boys better come out right now." Ethan froze. Caleb dropped his bag. Noah whispered, "Run." They ran for the fence, but they were too late. Hands grabbed Ethan by the shirt and dragged him down. Noah tried to climb over the fence, but someone caught his ankle and pulled him back hard. There were men everywhere. Ethan could not see their faces clearly. The flashlight beams blinded him. They wore work jackets, boots, and caps pulled low over their heads. At first, Ethan thought they were farmhands. Maybe neighbors, maybe Mr. Holcomb and his friends. But then he noticed something strange. None of them were breathing hard. None of them sounded angry in a normal way. They sounded amused. One of the men stepped toward Caleb. "You came stealing from the wrong place," he said. Caleb tried to apologize. He said they would give everything back. He said they were stupid kids. He begged them to let them go. The man smiled. Then he struck Caleb across the face with a thick branch. The sound was sickening. Caleb collapsed. Ethan screamed, but another man grabbed him by the shoulders and forced him to watch. They beat Caleb again and again. His cries echoed across the field, rising into the night, then weakening. Noah was crying now, begging them to stop. Ethan could not move. His body felt locked in place, then the beating stopped. Caleb lay still. One of the men crouched beside him, tilted his head, and said, "That one's done." Ethan's mind refused to accept what he was seeing. This was not punishment. This was not anger. This was something else. The men poured something from a metal can over Caleb's body. The sharp smell hit Ethan immediately. "Gasoline." "No," Ethan whispered. The match struck for 1 second. The flame was small. Then Caleb's body erupted into fire. Ethan's scream tore through his throat until there was nothing left inside him. The heat washed over his face. The smell of burning clothes and hair filled the air. Noah tried to run. The men caught him. Ethan fainted before he saw what they did next. When he opened his eyes, he was still lying in the field. The moon was still overhead. The men were still there. And now 2 fires burned in front of him. One was Caleb. The other was Noah. Ethan understood without being told. One of the men turned toward him and smiled. "Your turn." Something broke inside Ethan. He threw himself up from the ground and ran. He had no idea where he was going. Branches scratched his face. Rocks cut into his bare hands when he stumbled. His legs burned, but he kept running. Behind him, he heard the men laughing, not shouting. Laughing, eventually, the field gave way to trees, and the trees opened into the old cemetery. Bells Rest. Ethan saw the ruined chapel and ran inside. He crouched behind a collapsed wall, pressing both hands over his mouth to silence his breathing. His whole body trembled. He waited for footsteps, for voices, for flashlight beams moving through the broken windows. But after a while, everything went still. No voices, no footsteps, only the wind moving through the weeds. Ethan slowly stood. He stepped out of the chapel. That was when he saw the fires. 2 burning shapes stood in the cemetery. At first, he thought they were piles of brush, but then they moved. They rose from the flames like people standing up from graves. Ethan could not breathe. 2 human figures, completely engulfed in fire, began walking toward him. Their skin was blackened, their clothes were gone. Flames moved over them like living things. Then they spoke, together, Ethan. His knees nearly gave out. "Help us, Ethan." Their voices were Caleb's and Noah's. "The fire won't stop. It hurts. Please put it out." They came closer. Ethan stumbled backward, shaking his head. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." The burning figures reached toward him. "Don't leave us." Ethan ran again. He tore through the cemetery, past the broken gate, down the path toward the river. He could feel heat behind him. He could hear the crackling of flames, the soft, wet sound of burned feet stepping through grass. When he reached the riverbank, the rowboat was still tied to the branch. He jumped in, untied it with shaking hands, and rowed harder than he had ever rowed in his life. The river stretched wide and silver under the moon. For a few minutes, Ethan thought he had escaped. Then the boat touched shore. He climbed out, gasping, ready to run home. But something was wrong. The same tree leaned over the bank. The same branch hung above the water. The same path led back toward the cemetery. Ethan stared in horror. He had crossed the river, but somehow returned to the same side. "No," he breathed. He shoved the boat back into the water and climbed in again. Before he could row, heat bloomed behind him. A terrible, suffocating heat, slowly. Ethan turned. Caleb and Noah were standing in the boat, burning. Their faces were almost unrecognizable, but Ethan knew them. He knew them the way a person knows a nightmare before it speaks. "Don't leave us," they said. The boat rocked beneath him. One of them laughed. Not Caleb's laugh. Not Noah's, something pretending to be them. From the riverbank, Ethan heard more laughter. He looked back and saw the men standing there in a line, their faces hidden in shadow. Their shoulders shook with silent amusement. The world around him felt like hell, fire in the boat. Dead men on the bank, moonlight on the water. Ethan did the only thing he could do. He jumped. The river swallowed him whole. The cold hit like a hammer. He kicked, clawed, and dragged himself upward. When his head broke the surface, he heard someone calling his name. Ethan. A lantern swung in the distance. A real boat was coming toward him. "Ethan, hold on." He tried to swim toward the voice, but his body was failing. The river pulled at his legs. His lungs burned. Just as he began to sink, strong hands grabbed his shirt and hauled him into the boat. His father was there. So were Caleb, Noah, and Ryan. "I'll leave all three of them." Ethan stared at them, unable to speak. Caleb shook his shoulder. "Man, what happened to you?" Noah looked terrified. "We've been looking everywhere." Ryan, pale and confused, said, "You never showed up." Ethan tried to answer, but all that came out was a broken sound. Before he passed out, he looked back toward the far riverbank. A burning figure stood there, and beside it stood the men in the dark, still laughing. Ethan woke the next afternoon in his own bed. His parents were there. So were his friends. Everyone asked the same questions. Where had he gone? Why had he disappeared? Why had he been found half drowned in the river after midnight? Ethan told them everything: the orchard, the men, Caleb and Noah being killed, the cemetery, the burning figures, the boat that kept returning to the wrong side of the river. When he finished, nobody spoke. Then Caleb shook his head. "Ethan," he said quietly, "that never happened." According to his friends, they had all gone to meet under the maple tree at 11. Ethan never showed up. After waiting for a while, Caleb, Noah, and Ryan went to his house. Ethan answered the door himself. They said he looked tired. Strange. When they asked if he was coming, he told them, "Not tonight, something feels wrong." Then he shut the door. A few hours later, Ethan was gone. His parents woke to find his bed empty. The back door was open. His shoes were still by the porch. No one knew how he had ended up across the river. No one could explain the cuts on his feet, the burn mark across his left shoulder, or the smell of smoke in his hair. And Ethan could never explain who had walked with him that night wearing his friends' faces. Years have passed since then. Caleb, Noah, and Ryan all grew up and left Willow Creek. The pear orchard was sold. The old cemetery is still there, though most people avoid it after sunset. Ethan is older now, but he still does not go near rivers at night. He still wakes, sometimes smelling gasoline. And every summer, when the moon is full and the air turns strangely cold, he hears them again. Two voices whispering from somewhere far away. "Ethan, don't leave us. The fire still hurts."